Next up, we have Regice, yet another legendary Braille Golem. This Pokemon is one cool customer, as it's always cloaked in air, clocking in at a breezy temperature of -328 Fahrenheit, or -200 Celsius. Brandon used one against Ash in the excellent Battle Frontier arc of the anime, though Regice lost to Pikachu because anime logic. Also, anyone who's seen Lucario and the Mystery of Mew will remember Regice's cry as well. Today, we'll see if the Regice was able to make like Lucius best and freeze the competition. So we ask, how good was Regice actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. In its debut generation, Regice was traditionally considered one of the best 3 special walls alongside Blissey and Snorlax. With the unique move Psych Up, it could, in theory, prevent the ever-present Calm Minders of the tier from overwhelming it like they potentially could the other 2. However, Regice was quite flawed as a defensive Pokemon. It had its leftovers nullified by Sandstorm and didn't pack an instant recovery move, meaning it was easily susceptible to being worn down by repeated hits. The only way it could heal was with Rest, which left it incredibly vulnerable to being picked off by Dugtrio. This reliance on Rest meant Regice was also not a great Calm Mind answer in general. If it was forced out while asleep, which it very easily could be with Tyranitar or Metagross, then it wouldn't be able to stop the Calm Minders the next time they came in. And if it did, it'd be by the skin of its teeth, and the process would simply be repeated until it fell. The passivity caused by its helplessness during rest turns also meant that it was a critical hit magnet if the game came down to it withstanding a ton of +6 attacks. Plus, it couldn't even handle Suicune even while awake, since Suicune regularly ran Roar, meaning Regice would end up as setup fodder instead of a counter. Regice also got crippled incredibly hard by Gengar's Will-O-Wisp, unlike the natural cure packing Blissey, which also had instant recovery and was all around superior to Regice as a defensive Pokemon. Snorlax also had these problems, but it posed a massive threat itself with its curse set. So as a result, Regice was more commonly used as an offensive role, where it performed much better. It hit quite hard with special attack investment, with Ice Beam terrifying Salamence, Zapdos, and Celebi, while providing a good hit on common ice neutral switch-ins like Tyranitar and Swampert. Ice Beam was complemented by Thunderbolt hitting Skarmory and non-Swampert waters hard. For the third move, Regice had 2 choices. It could round its coverage out with Hidden Power Fire to thwart the Metagross, Jirachi, and Fortress that resisted Ice Beams and didn't mind Stabless Thunderbolts. The other option was Thunder Wave, which was a good fit as ground types didn't want to switch into Regice, and paralyzing Tyranitar, Metagross, or Jirachi would be great. Even paralyzing a Snorlax would work, as it meant Lax would be outsped even if its Body Slam dished out its own paralysis. In fact, some players really wanted the paralysis option, but did not want to give up the coverage of HP Fire, so they merged Thunderbolt's coverage and Thunder Wave's paralysis into one option, Thunder. The harder hit was worthwhile despite the mediocre accuracy against Steels and Waters, and while the paralysis spreading wasn't nearly as consistent, it usually got the job done. Regice's low speed stat meant it could easily go with a max special attack and HP spread. This HP investment alongside its naturally sky-high special defense stat meant it was still naturally bulky enough to fend off special attackers such as Zapdos, providing important defensive backbone for the offensive teams it was placed on. It compensated for not being able to consistently perform that role long-term in the face of Sandstorm and Spikes by gathering offensive progress for its teammates to take advantage of. Specifically, its job was to use the free turns it got from switching into these special attackers to bait in the opponent's special sponge, usually Blissey or Snorlax, and use its 4th move on them, Explosion, removing the biggest obstacle to its special attacking teammates and allowing them to threaten a sweep. This was one of the most important offensive combinations in Advance. Blissey was notoriously unkillable, and Snorlax wasn't too easy to take down either. The Explosion lure strategy was metagame defining as one of the best ways to make special attacking offense work in the face of these behemoths. But of course, it was rarely as easy as Step 1, Regice baits in and blows up the special wall, Step 2, victory. First off, Regice's attack stat is downright miserable, and investing EVs into it either cuts into its bulk or its special attack, neither of which are stellar enough for Regice to not notice the effects of cutting into them. This means even with Explosion's effective 500 base power and its target's mediocre defense stats, it's not going to be KOing them without serious prior damage, which can be difficult to make stick, especially without Sandstorm, the lack of which also meaning they can potentially heal out of KO range from Regice's teammates after Regice is already already blown up. However, this is where Regice's best friend Dugtrio comes in to save the day. Should the target survive the explosion, Dugtrio comes in to guarantee the KO. Dugtrio has earned the title of BFF not just for finishing off Bliss and Lax, who've survived explosion, but because it helps massively with Regice's other issue, the fact that Pokemon other than special walls are capable of switching into it. Sometimes Regice can't get a clear shot at Blissey or Lax because the opponent knows what the Regice user is looking for, and to counteract this, they switch Metagross, Jirachi, or Tyranitar into Regice instead. If Regice can't get the special sponge, then its special sweeping teammates will never win. Dugtrio fixes this. With the right mix of patience, foresight, and intelligent, carefully aggressive play, Dugtrio allows the Regice player to punish the opponent for over-relying on this maneuver throughout the game, allowing Regice to then zero in on the target and proceed as planned. Foresight, no not the move, was required to get the best use out of Regice anyway. You didn't want to be too telegraphed with the explosion, lest Blissey or Snorlax's teammate Gengar switch in and make your efforts go to waste. It took more skill than some of the tier's more autopilot options, but Regice rewarded talented trainers and could completely turn the tables on someone expecting their Blissey to sit there and wall everything. It wasn't a top metagame superstar, but it was certainly a key component of advanced OU. Regice was hit so hard by Gen 4's power creep, it almost felt like a calculated effort to knock it down as far as possible. OU saw a ton of new threats, namely Heatran, Infernape, and Lucario, plus old threats got more difficult for Regice to deal with, as Tyranitar got a special defense boost and Gengar gained an incredibly powerful Focus Blast. The real problem though was Stealth Rock. If Regice got worn down quickly with Sandstorm and one layer of spikes in advance, it was nothing compared to the immediate quarter health hit it took upon entry in Gen 4, especially since Stealth Rock was on every single team. As if the instant loss of 25% wasn't enough, the addition of Life Orb and Choice Specs made it even more difficult for Regice to take hits. Even if you tried to take Stealth Rock out of the picture with a spinner, that was A, not something to rely on, and B, not worth it, as even without rocks digging into it, Regice was an inferior choice. The explode on Blissey with a special attacker mantle was taken up by Heatran, who was faster, stronger, and had far better typing. Defensively, Blissey was still wholly superior, and this time adding not being Stealth Rock weak to its already lengthy list of reasons why it was significantly better than Regice. Sadly, Regice never stood a semblance of a chance in OU. And unfortunately, Regice wasn't too great in UU either, because Stealth Rock was there too. Luckily, the issue wasn't exacerbated by Sandstorm, but it was a major issue nonetheless. Again, even if one went to the trouble of spinning for it, it was still entirely outclassed defensively, this time by Chansey, who had reliable recovery, natural cure for Toxic, wasn't Stealth Rock weak, and could even set up Stealth Rock of its own. But on the fortunate side, DPP UU has a niche for just about everything, and Regice was not so terrible that it was exempt from this. Its offensive set was quite decent, as Ice Beam was an excellent tool against a plethora of ground types in the tier, as well as Tier King Venusaur. Plus it gained Focus Blast, which was huge for slamming its fellow Registeel, an incredibly popular Pokemon in the metagame. The offensive set was also notable because with Life Orb boosting Explosion, Regice could lure and KO Chansey itself without necessitating Dugtrio. Chansey bait was incredibly crucial considering the enormous slew of special attackers it stopped, and being able to remove Chansey like Regice could was unique within the UU metagame. The extra power on Thunderbolt also meant Milotic would have a difficult time stalling it out. Regice was primarily used as Chansey bait, but if something else was tasked with dealing with Chansey, it could drop Explosion for Rock Polish and completely turn the tables on offensive teams. Normally, they couldn't take Regice's hits too well, but they were able to deal with it since it was slower and susceptible to repeated hits. However, Rock Polish took that option away from them. But it wasn't a perfect sweeper, as Arcanine needed to be worn down and there was lots of strong priority flying around. Plus, it could sometimes struggle to switch in and set up safely, given Stealth Rock and its poor defensive typing. However, it certainly scared the Scyther, Torterra, and Mismagius or Rotom styles of offense, especially if they were packing a frailer water like Quillfish or Kabutops, and could do a lot of damage even if it didn't end up fully sweeping. Despite Regice's offensive set's decent merit, it didn't fit on too many teams, and thus wasn't seen very much. As a result, it dropped to NU in Gen 4. There, it wasn't much of a wall thanks to Stealth Rock and a lack of recovery, but it was quite decent in spite of that. Regice was just about unwallable itself outside of Hypno, which could easily be pursued by Skunk Tank. Everything else got slammed really hard by the Bolt Beam Focus Blast combination, which made the Rock Polish variant a fearsome late game sweeper. Of course, Regice could explode on Hypno itself to clear the path for another Pokemon. Regice Regice's ability to stand in top tier threat Jinx's way was also invaluable given how scary Jinx was and how vulnerable the main counter, Slowking, was to pursuit. Regice's low speed, stealth rock weakness, and lack of useful resistances still bogged it down, but the surrounding power level was now such that it was a legitimate Pokemon in the metagame, able to perform in battle consistently despite its flaws. Gen 5's power creep left Regice in the dust, as OU was not the only tier beyond its reach now. It couldn't even muster a niche in not only UU, but even the new RU. It settled into NU once again, though that placement was lower in this generation than the previous one. There, it wasn't initially thought to be anything special. The offensive threats that dominated the metagame, Charizard, Sock, and Kangaskhan, did not give Regice any breathing room. Plus, there was a dearth of spinners, so Stealth Rock was always going to be an issue, amplified as always by Regice's terrible speed and lack of useful resistances. However, it was eventually discovered that Regice was quite the threat. Most of the metagame couldn't handle powerful Bolt Beam, and the few things that could, like Probopass, Rotom Frost, Piloswine, Klinklang, and even Regirock, got utterly melted by Focus Blast. This meant once Regice got a Rock Polish off, it was a huge threat to dish out a ton of damage, possibly even pulling off a clean sweep. Usually the only thing that stood in its way was Eevee-like Girder and its powerful Mach Punch, but that still didn't want to actually switch into an Ice Beam. It was able to do this thanks to its amazing special bulk, allowing it to stop one of the tier's most dangerous offensive Pokemon in Ludicolo, which otherwise similarly mauled offensive teams. Regice didn't just excel at dominating offense though, it was a massive headache for defense as well. The seemingly unkillable Alomomola stuffed most of the tier's offensive threats, but Regice's Life Orb Thunderbolt blew right past it. Even the incredibly bulky Musharna couldn't take 2 Ice Beams with Stealth Rock up. Regice was a fairly hidden gem that wasn't discovered until very late in the tier's existence, but it was a thoroughly excellent Pokemon in Black and White NU. It was incredibly tough to wall, and it mowed offense down after a Rock Polish. It was key for offensive teams, not just as for these traits, but also for stopping Ludicolo, which these teams usually feared like little else. Overall, Regice fell further than before, but this time it truly shone where it ended up. Gen 6's new additions knocked everything down a few notches, resulting in each tier getting stronger than the previous generation. What this meant for Regice was that NU was now too much for it, and it ended up in the new lowest tier, PU. Defog being buffed was a major boon, as it was now easy to have a Pokemon like Prinplup or Vullaby that could easily remove hazards and thus improve Regice's survivability a ton. Something else that did wonders for Regice's longevity was the discovery of how useful Protect could be on it. Maximizing Leftovers recovery made Ice tough to wear down even with Stealth Rock on the field, allowing it to use its massive bulk to consistently check Pokemon like Floatzel and Chatot without over-relying on its teammates' Defog support. It wasn't passive at all though, as the only bulk investment it needed was max HP. With max special attack alongside a modest nature and its Bolt Beam Focus Blast combination, it was still incredibly tough to switch into. It was the definition of a tank. It took hits well and dished them back out hard. This made it a more consistent overall Pokemon than when it was only viable with the Rock Polish set, as that variant could not be used defensively, lest it wreck its chances at a sweep by taking irrecoverable damage. Of course, the Rock Polisher was still fearsome. If its user didn't need Regice's defensive talents, it could easily set up against the many Pokemon that couldn't hurt it, such as Rotom Frost, and go to town, as Regice was even more difficult to wall with the Life Orb attached. It wasn't as consistent a full-blown sweeper thanks to the popularity of Stoutland in Sand, which Revenge killed it easily, but in that case it wouldn't be going for a sweep, it'd just be dishing out massive damage. Stoutland could only come in after Regice had already KO'd something after all. Basically, the tank set was more consistent overall, but the Rock Polish was incredibly powerful. Overall, Regice was one of the faces of the lowest tiers yet. It was disappointing that power creep has sent it hurtling all the way down there, but upon arrival, it thrived. It had variety added to its game that made it a more well-rounded, consistent Pokemon, and as a result, it absolutely excelled. Sadly, Regice was not able to break the tradition of being significantly negatively affected by each generation's power creep. Gen 7 saw it given the lowest dishonor that a fully evolved Pokemon can have cast upon its name, untiered. That terrible limbo where the lack of viability and usage intersect to make Pokemon deemed worthy of the title not recommended for use even in PU. Technically, it does have a niche in the PU tier, as offensively it's decent. The Rock Polish set was not easy to wall, as with Focus Blast powered up until all-out non-stop pummeling, making it even harder to wall. It crushes Audino, Mawile, Lantern, and Hitmonchan. However, it's almost never going to pull off a successful sweep. Scarf Primeape is everywhere and outruns Regice after a boost, while Scyther poses a similar problem, and Lycanroc's Accelerock picks it off with ease. While these Pokemon couldn't switch in safely, they forced Regice out after a KO, and it likely wouldn't get a shot at another one due to its poor defensive traits of low speed, no bulk investment, and most importantly, a lack of Pokemon it could come back to safely capitalize on, which leads into the next point. Defensively, it couldn't run the more consistent by nature tank set because it didn't handle enough relevant Pokemon, well, really just Oricorio, to make up for the fact that it so severely struggled with so much of the metagame, which was mostly comprised of physical attackers that preyed on Regice's low speed, average defense, and weakness to common physical attacks. Regice also vied with Abomasnow as an ice type whose secondary grass typing and excellent move pool made it much more consistently easier to use on both the offensive and defensive spectrum. Regice isn't the worst Pokemon you could use in PU, but unfortunately it's difficult to make work. It'd take quite the deft hand to get much consistent use out of it. And before we end, as for VGC, we sadly couldn't find any notable placements for Regice. Yeah, sorry. And that's it. So how good was Regice actually? Well, it had a solid start in Gen 3 OU, but then took a massive hit in the subsequent generation and didn't improve in the generations after that. It's been decent in the lower tiers, but not much more than that, and it lost even that in the latest generation. Ice types are less suited to slow defense than fast offense, which is why Regice was usually at its best as a rock polish sweeper. But relying on a move to patch its speed just isn't anywhere near the same as naturally being fast. Regice is also a great example of how oppressive Stealth Rock can be, and it's not even 4 times weak to it. Overall, Regice had a bumpy ride through the ever-descending roller coaster of lower tiers. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And as for the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Regice? How would you improve it? What would it take for it to come back to its Gen 3 OU status? Whatever it is, let me know down below. And to vote for next week's Pokemon, comment on the latest post in the community tab that should go up around the same time or a little bit after this video's release. And of course, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms, and that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.